Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I call your attention? It's now 2:30, and I wish that we can start so that we prosecute the afternoon in good time. Thank you and welcome. My name is David Changwon. I will have a very short piece of work to do just to transition our colleagues through the program this afternoon. So our session this afternoon is titled Sustainable Funding for NARS Towards Transformative Agricultural Research, a Pathway to Resilient Food Systems in a Climate Crisis. And we are sitting here at conference room number 9. So I welcome all of you for the proceedings that will ensue. Like I said, I have a short piece of work to transition colleagues. And I want to start, as we start with session number, before we start with session number 1, I'll welcome Bwana Odhiambo to open for us with a word of prayer.
Let's believe and pray. Precious Lord, King of Kings, we give you thanks for the gift of life and good health. We bless your name for enabling us to gather here today, Almighty God. We pray for your intervention and guidance as we brainstorm on best ideas and best approaches for funding research towards sustainable food productivity that will help us to enhance resilience in the midst of climate change and also provide sufficient food for the ballooning population. We bless your name and give you thanks. We ask you to continue guiding us. Let your strong hand stretch upon us. Let your love and the spirit of understanding, which surpasses human understanding, manifest upon us as we deliberate. We bless your name and give you thanks. It is in the name of Jesus Christ we pray and believe.
Thank you, and thank you, Odhiambo, for the opening prayer. So now I'm going to welcome Dr. Lusike Wasilwa to take us through the first session. Welcome, Dr. Lusike.
So you can see we're very gender balanced in Calro, and therefore Kenya, a man first talks, men first, women next, but we are better. So I'm here to set the stage. I'm Lusike Wasilwa, Director, Crop Systems, Calro, but now we're transiting to Africa, the NARS in Africa, and that's why we're here. We thank you all for taking the time. Oh, I'm not being seen by the people. Where? Here, okay. Apparently the people online want to see how beautiful I am. Quite beautiful with a very big gap. So we're here representing the NARS. All the NARS that are here. Can we see West Africa? This one, I only have 3. West Africa, NARS. Nobody from West Africa. Southern Africa, NARS. Oh. One of the Calro young researchers, go and get the West African NARS to come in. East African NARS, no Kenya. Do you have Ugandans, Tanzanians? Come on, Ethiopians, I saw you here. You're not here? They've disappeared, wow. So we're NARS from Africa, but we're not from the north, the south, the east, or the west. So I don't know where from. Central Africa NARS? Okay. I'm not going to post you. I think you are all very shy. We're here today to discuss where is funding for the NARS. How come it's dwindled down to 0.02%? What are the funding landscapes? Where are these landscapes and how do we get them to be able to get to top up the government allocations for the NARS in Africa? Who are our donors? Who are we competing against? And how do we beat them at this competition? What do we need to do to change the way we undertake research or the type of research that we're undertaking to be able to attract funding for research. That's what we're here for. We all need a little bit more money. So who do we go to? Is it the private sector? I know in South Africa, University of Stellenbosch, a lot of the temperate food research is paid for by the private sector. How much of the private sector is funding research in Kenya? We've just gotten our first private sector engagement about a month ago for Calro. So how do we then get the funding for the NARS? What is the current status? Is it 0.2%? Is it 2% according to NEPAD declaration? Where are we in terms of funding? What are these trends? We see the international agriculture, they're able to attract funding. What are they doing? What are the trends in funding for agricultural research? So when we look at how we're shifting in the priorities for funding, how do we shift with it? Now we have a whole bunch of youth that we're seeing right here. How can the youth take home from this particular activity that will be 2 hours today? What will they take home to be able to access funding for research? So I now take, I hope I took 3 minutes there. I take now this opportunity to welcome our first presenter. Our first presenter in this session is Dr. Evans Elasia. And Dr. Elasia is the Deputy Director General for Livestock in Calro. So don't feel bad that it's Kenya, and another Kenyan. We're the best, we're the fastest. We're the only ones who have run the marathon in less than 2 hours. And we ruled America, so you take it, you just have to accept it. So Dr. Elasia. I am a human being, and to err is to be human. I came with a gadget here called some tablet. Then I forgot to use it because I'm totally analog. I'm proud of it. I was using my paper, but sorry, the digital document tells me I forgot to invite my boss. Let me invite my boss. So now we're becoming more gender balanced with more women. I invite the Deputy Director General Crops, Dr. Felista McKean, who's going to work me proper when we're done here. And she's going to come in and set the stage. She's going to set the stage on the role of the NARS. Yeah, it's very difficult. It's confusing here. She's going to set a stage on the role of the NARS in regional agriculture transformation. Listen and take good notes. And then you can beat me later. Here you go, Dr. McKean.
Thank you so much, Lusike. Good afternoon, everyone. Very glad to see all of you here. Thank you for coming. Oh, here's Mr. Patel. Yes. Sorry, we'll take your space. Okay. So let me stay here so that even those online can also see me. We are very excited to be here and to have this session. I'll be presenting this on behalf of the DG who is not able to be with us. So I'll make these opening remarks on his behalf. And so distinguished guests, partners, and colleagues, indeed it's my great honor really to welcome you all to this critical discussion. I believe we are all here because we want to know what is the way forward and how we are going to move on this sustainable funding for the national agricultural research systems, the NARS, towards transformative agricultural research, a pathway to resilient food systems in a climate crisis. As we gather here today, we recognize the significant role that research plays in addressing the challenges facing African agriculture, particularly in the wake of climate change, the evolving market demands, and the urgent need for food and nutrition security. However, achieving sustainable research outcomes require sustainable funding mechanisms. So I want to talk about the current funding landscape for NARS in Africa. The funding landscape for NARS in Africa is dynamic, yet constrained. Many of our institutions rely heavily on project-based donor funding, which often leads to fragmented research priorities. While governments provide co-funding, these allocations are often inadequate to support long-term agricultural research and innovation. As donor priorities shift and competition for funding intensifies, it is imperative that we explore strategies to enhance financial sustainability. This discussion will critically assess the level of government funding, the evolving role of donors, the limitations of project-based financing, and the potential for diversifying revenue streams through private sector engagement. Understanding these dynamics will help shape effective resource mobilization strategies for the African NARS. So to secure the future of agricultural research, we must explore diversified, innovative, and sustainable funding models, which include the public-private partnerships, the PPPs, to leverage both public and corporate investments in research. The endowment funds to provide long-term financial stability for research institutions, competitive grants to encourage excellence and innovation, commercialization of research outputs to generate revenue while ensuring impact, the climate financing and blended finance models to align research funding with climate resilience efforts, crowdfunding and digital financing platforms as emerging opportunities to mobilize resources. Through this session, we will showcase successful case studies that demonstrate how these funding models have been effectively implemented, providing a roadmap to their wider adoption. So we need to strengthen regional collaboration for resource mobilization, because regional cooperation presents a strategic approach to addressing funding challenges while maximizing impact. By working together through platforms such as the African Union, ASARECA, CORAF, and regional economic blocs, NARS institutions can enhance access to resources, share research infrastructure, and align policies to attract investments. This session will explore how we can create economies of scale, strengthen bargaining power with donors, and foster knowledge exchange to promote sustainable agricultural research and innovation. Our collective efforts will be instrumental in securing the future of research-driven agricultural transformation across the continent. This session will provide an opportunity for key stakeholders, the policymakers, researchers, donors, and private sector players to reflect on the discussions and share insights on funding challenges and opportunities. Their perspectives will help consolidate lessons learned and inform actionable recommendations for improving agricultural research financing in Africa. NARS play a pivotal role in driving agricultural transformation and ensuring food system resilience across Africa. Their achievements are a testament to the power of research in addressing key agricultural challenges. Some of these achievements include the improved crop varieties and livestock breeds developed to enhance productivity and climate resilience, the soil and water management technologies that have improved land productivity, mechanization and digital solutions that are transforming farming practices and improving efficiency, extension and capacity building programs that have empowered farmers with knowledge and skills. A few case studies highlight the impact of NARS across the region, looking at the Kenya's dairy sector, which has seen tremendous growth due to the research-backed breeding programs. The Ethiopia's wheat self-sufficiency drive has been fueled by high-yielding, climate-resilient varieties. The Nigeria's cassava transformation has created new markets and improved livelihoods through value-added processing. These examples demonstrate that well-funded and well-coordinated research systems are the backbone of food security and economic growth. However, Sustaining such success requires continued investment and regional cooperation. And so there's a call to action and also having some recommendations. As we conclude, it is evident that NARS must secure sustainable funding to continue driving agriculture transformation in Africa. Therefore, I urge governments to increase budgetary allocations for agricultural research, development partners to align their support with long-term research priorities rather than short-term projects. The private sector to invest in research as a means of enhancing innovation and value chain development. Regional bodies to strengthen collaboration and harmonize policies to attract more funding. Together, we must commit to securing the future of agricultural research. With adequate funding, NARS will continue to lead in transforming food systems and building resilience in the face of climate change. I thank you all for your participation and look forward to the valuable discussions ahead. Let us work together to ensure that agricultural research in Africa remains well-funded, innovative, and impactful. Thank you very much. God bless you all for coming.
Decided that us analogs need some stage to use, but thank you very much, Dr. McKinney. She has set the stage. She's been able to tell us what we need to do, who we need to partner with, but now it's to create that linkage. So we thank you so much. So our next presentation is a keynote paper, and we thank the keynote deliverer who's going to address on funding of agriculture research in a changing climate. This will be delivered by Dr. Walter Oyawa. Dr. Oyawa is the Director General of the National Commission for Science and Technology and Innovation, NACOSTI.
Yes,
thank
you. Yeah, am I audible?
I hope we can see him. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to Carl Rodigi and team for this invitation. I see I've been given 10 minutes and I would really try to stick to that. Also to inform, I think, distinguished participants that I'll be touching on this very important topic of funding agricultural research from the perspective of a regulator. I come from the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, which is the institution that registered CalRO and also regulates CalRO and other research institutions. When we talk about funding, it is the elephant in the room, I think, in recent times. But I believe researchers have a mechanism to go around it to ensure that our country continues in the path of progress from research outcomes. Allow me from the foremost to inform that at the moment, Kenya is in a rapid transformation mode in the area of research. And this is coming all the way from the top. It's about first escalating matters of research to the national level. That's when our voices will be heard. And I remember 2 years back when the president had a national celebration marked as a research and innovation day, where he made a very powerful statement that is betting on research, science, technology, and innovation in deepening the trust and strengthening public confidence in government. And if that is so, what we should be asking ourselves as researchers, do we always follow up in some of these key pronouncements by the head of state and by senior leaders of this country? And the same applies. I think last week we were in Rwanda with the Kenyan delegation led by the Prime Cabinet Secretary on the Global AI Initiative for Africa. Do we participate in such forums? Because in those forums is where we create partnerships, is where we touch on the most current activities that affect the world. So I put it was that we really have to change our line of thinking as researchers. Before, it was automatic. You are a researcher, you are given money, and you research, give your outcomes, publish, and so forth and so forth. Now it's a totally different story. That the question being asked is that what will be the impact of your research on the people? People want immediate results, not 5-year results. They are talking of more of the applied research, and that's how our researchers are losing. And the same thing is applying to our funding body, a powerful funding body, the National Research Fund. And I've seen my colleague, Professor Andala there. The funding of the National Research Fund to fund researchers has been going down. When I'm told the stories, it was like from 7 billion to 3 billion to 700 million, and now it's around 300 to 400 million. That is too low because that money is also supposed to be used for the administrative costs. So the main funding body, the National Research Fund, is really handicapped. You have to help them, put a voice for them to get more money. But in addition, we also have to try and escalate matters of research, science, and technology to the forefront. Yeah, there is what they always call the African paradox. This is a statement which all of us have Googled, where they say there's so much wealth in Africa. They say 20% of the Earth's surface is arable in Africa. We boast of 60% of world arable lands, a population of 1.3 billion, 30% of the world reserve minerals is in Africa. And yet the data which is there, that Africa contributes only 2% of world research output. That is what we need to be addressing. Why is it that we're contributing 2% of the world research output? Are we competitive enough? Because nobody is going to come to us to give us money. We have to really demonstrate in the world stage that we deserve that money. And it also said that Africa accounts for only 1.3% of research spending. So the question is, how do we inspire our governments to be able to make a deliberate decision, the way they make a decision on health, the way they make a deliberate decision on food security? Can they make that deliberate decision that as we want to ensure that Africans and Kenyans have food security, what are we invested in research which informs the outcomes of that benefit the Kenyans? And the saddest of all is when they say that Africa produces only 0.1% of all patents. What does that tell you? We have had this debate. I also happen to be a board member of CalRO, and we have had that debate. And I won't give the figures now, but you could ask the CalRO team how many patents they have, and what will that tell you? If you don't have patents, where has that knowledge gone? Has it gone out? Is it buried in the ground? Because it is that patent that allows you to get more funding through the monetization of that funding. So if you compare our kind of amount of patents in Kenya, in East Africa, or even in Africa itself, it is so low compared to those great nations that we aspire to be like. And that means we cannot get money, we cannot get returns on research investment. Yeah, at some point, I'll give you the best example. When the National Research Funding Board of Trustees met Parliamentary Committee, I think that was before the current CEO came in, and the Parliamentary Committee was so sympathetic. Why are you giving this very little money to the National Research Fund? That was the big question at that time. But then one of them asked a very simple question. Even with the little money that we've been giving the National Research Fund, what is there for the ordinary person to see? Have we come up with the first Kenyan car? So there's a lot happening like in CalRO, and I know it because I've gone to CalRO centers, but does the common person know that? Because that informs the decision at the highest levels. So we need to have a brand, what we might call science diplomacy, to find a way of communicating what we do. That is the first level of escalating matters and getting more funds for National Research Fund and others. But allow me also to mention that the Kenya government is doing quite a lot, and I think this is my work based on my work at NACOSTI. One of the things that the president has done is to establish a Presidential Advisory Council on Science and Technology. This is for the first time in Kenya since our 60-year independence. We are waiting for members of that advisory council for the president to be formed. The president has also gone out of his way, and I think a year or so ago, appointed for the first time a special envoy on technology. Technology feeds from research, it's fed by research. And we were with the ambassador, I think, in Rwanda last week. So how have we used that platform of a special envoy on technology, as CalRO, as KEMRI, as ILRI, as all the research institutions? How have we made a special arrangement to meet the special envoy to be able to be allocated the money? So what I'm saying in short, that if we continue staying in our labs and staying in our institutions and expect that fund just to come after writing maybe a request to the National Treasury through our annual reporting, it is very, very unlikely to come. And when we're going to ask for that fund, we have to tell them that what you gave us last year, this is how it is impacting Kenya. So the presidency has done a lot. In addition, even for us as the National Commission, we are now coordinating an important target called the Science, Technology, Innovation Mainstreaming, which includes research. And we get data, a lot of data, which is now informing Kenya's global competitiveness. Now, that is one of the ways of escalating matters of RSTI. And the latest that happened, I think happened, is it 2 or 3 weeks ago, when for the first time again, His Excellency the President established for the first time an independent State Department for Science, Research, and Innovation. And it will be headed by the former CEO of NACOSTI, Professor Abdul Razak Shaukat. Now, what I'm asking ourselves, including myself and including the team that is here, especially the Kenyan team, have we made special arrangements of how to approach the new peers? Yeah, do we have something that we want him to convey to the authorities to be able to attract more money? Because if we wait for him to come to us, then that might not work. It's a special State Department and it's science, research, and innovation. Inside there, there'll be funding for agricultural research. So what measures do we need to take? But in a nutshell, what I would want to say that when we talk in terms of funding, there needs to be a great paradigm shift. We need to go out there and market our case. So as mentioned by what Dr. McKenna just presented, there are standard ways of getting funding. One of them is through the GOK, that is through the National Research Fund. Those fundings are going down. As much as we're struggling, it's going down. Now, there's the other side, which is the private sector. And the question is, how do we get money from the private sector? Again, in my 5 years experience at NACOSTI, what I'm seeing is the private sector thinks differently from the rest of the public service. They have no time for basic research and so forth. They want results. They want results that can transform their companies. So again, it's an issue of language. If you check a country like Switzerland, which is ranked as the #1 in the Global Innovation Index, you'll find that over 60% of funding of research comes from the private sector. The same applies to US, and I think most of Europe. I might not be coming from there, but I think most of the money comes from the private sector. So as we sit back and wait for the government to fund, which at the moment seems to be 0.8% of GDP, it is only that 0.8% is not coming through NRF. It is coming through other resources, including CalRO. CalRO has very many donors. And the moment those donors send their money to CalRO accounts, that becomes the government of Kenya money. So the private sector, what language do you need to use to get the private sector? How do you get Equity Bank to fund CalRO? How do you get Safaricom to fund CalRO? How do you get the East African breweries? Yeah, by producing value for them to fund CalRO and to fund all the other agricultural research. It is not something that you'll wait and come. There has to be a plan, whether you call it a Marshall Plan. Now, the third one is what is now being called the monetization of IP rights. We have very low patents. CalRO knows how many they have, but even the ones they have, how they monetize those funds to be able to plow back. Have they come up with an invention, a vaccine for animals? The other time, you can see we are getting vaccines from outside the country. Where is the role of CalRO and other institutions on that? So that we have vaccines, which we are saying this is CalRO vaccine, and for every dose that you get, these millions or billions will come to CalRO and the Kenya government and to the people. So the task, what I'm saying, the ball is in our court. How do we patent? Do we just publish and allow that data to go? Or do we seek to patent and do we follow up on the patents that keep it? That is the biggest elephant in the room. And so when you go to the mainstream key decision makers up there, they might not tell you this. You will ask for money, they'll not give you, but they have data, intelligence data that shows we may not have done what we expected to do. So monetization of IP rights is a key thing, making use of local indigenous resources. If you checked the press reports, don't know how far I've got. Yeah, if you check the press reports in some time back, where you are saying that Kenya's biodiversity, one of the best in the world, is being exploited and taken out of the country. I think, Carlo, you're aware of that. The great scientists who are there, Dr. McKenna, you're aware of that. What happens to that, what they're calling biopiracy? How can we not go there and convert those indigenous resources that are there at Lake Baringo, Lake Bogoria, and so forth, and convert them into something that is money for the people, to create jobs for the Kenyan people? Then fourthly, of course, is collaboration and partnerships. Not so easy, but in terms of collaborations and partnerships, what I also wanted to add is excellent, the president and the leadership. There are certain visits that they have made, bilateral agreements that they have made. He was in China, he was in the US, the other day he was at the University of Nairobi working with the French. Have we made an effort, like when he was talking about the University of Nairobi, Silicon Savannah, have we made an effort to write to the University of Nairobi VC that please, can we engage with you? So to put it in other words, why do we continue to work in silo? Yes, why do we continue to work in silo? Or if you're in the food security, you only see the people in agriculture working alone in that sector. They wouldn't want to involve social scientists, you wouldn't want to involve engineers, you wouldn't want to involve medics. So when we appeared before Parliamentary Committee on GMOs, and I think some of you are there, it was a very interesting scene. What was shown there was different teams, different institutes, different approaches to GMOs. And that's what makes it very difficult to have a convergence on this. So when do we use the whole of government approach, the multi-sector approach, to be able to deliver on what the people of Kenya expect? So in a nutshell, that's what I will talk about. Number one is the funds from NRF is very limited. We pray it will escalate. but very limited until something happens. Private sector has money. I would tell you, because we collect data, the data that we have now from other getting into the books of different organizations shows that the business enterprise has around 13 billion. I'm reading from a slide just in front of me. The business enterprise is about 13 billion for research, R&D. And R&D doesn't mean just research. It means also in R&D infrastructure, R&D training. So 13.6 billion in the business enterprise. The government of Kenya is giving about 60 billion, not through NRF, but through other means, through the state departments. Do we engage, like the National Construction Authority, for example? This is now general, not just for agriculture, which has a very powerful wing of research. Do we engage with the Kenya Space Agency, which checks on the weather and climate change? So when we talk about this, and the government, the records that we have show that yes, 60 billion. When you go to higher education, the resources that the universities have been able to attract, and I think this maybe includes Carlo inside here. We are seeing last year, it was around 19 billion came in. And you can just imagine one institution like the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University, they attracted 7 billion from US aid on our research. Yes, so the money is there. It's how to use it, how to get it, number one, then how to use it to impact the Kenyan people so that next time they get encouraged to continue. Then from the rest of the world, that's from abroad, the records show that there's 28 billion. If you add that, the money floating out there, and I know this might surprise you, is like there's money of annually of 121 billion Kenya shillings. So how do you access that money? And how do you use that to impact on money? The money is there. All we need to do is bring our minds together so that we stop working in silos, and you'll find that money is there. So with that, allow me to stop there. And if maybe one more I could add, in terms of collaborations and in terms of getting donor funds and others, we also have to subject ourselves to the global ranking systems. If you're going to apply for Horizon Europe funds, and as NACOST, we are a focal point to a number of these international obligations like Horizon Europe, like Erasmus Mundus, and so forth, how are you ranked? If you're applying as a researcher, one, are you well published? If you're applying as CALRO, how are you ranked to be able to access that Horizon Europe funds? How are you ranked when you want the American funds? How are you ranked when you want the French funds and so forth? So ranking becomes extremely important. When I visited South Africa, they will talk of, we are the best university in blah, 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 blah. That attracts, nobody would want to put in money if he doesn't know your rank. So let's get out there and do what is necessary. And I think we can have this conversation later on. The last one, which is not about funding, is about even as we seek this partnership and donor funding, an emerging concern is research security. I wouldn't talk about it, but I think it's an area of discussions now that as you engage, what are the benefits? Yeah, are we getting 10 shillings? Are we getting 10 shillings and losing 20 shillings? Or are we getting 100 shillings and losing only 2? What is the net gain? We have to be concerned. We have to find out when you are being funded, supported, whether for PhD research, master's research, what is the overall? And that brings in the concerns that are appearing everywhere. I think in the US, they're even arresting scientists. In Germany, I saw another professor arrested the other day, yeah, because it's about research espionage, and people are converting that into businesses, which are propelling the countries. In these times of the tariff that have come from the US, it is forcing us, we have to look inward. Less from donor, of course, we still need a donor fund, but inward. What is it that we can get from within? Thank you very much, and God bless. Back to you.
Thank you so much, our keynote speaker, and thank you for the session that has just ended. I want to thank Dr. McKinney for setting the stage for us, and also the keynote speaker, Professor Walter Oyawa, for that very informative session. Thank you also to Dr. Lusike for moderating for that short session. We want to transition quickly to the next session. Session 2 is discussion on strengthening regional collaboration for resource mobilization. I would therefore wish to welcome Professor Dickson Andala to lead us in that session. Karibu sana.
Thank you, moderator. As you heard, my name is Professor Dickson Andala. I come from the National Research Fund. The National Research Fund is a parastatal or a body incorporate domiciled here in Kenya, whose mandate is to mobilize, allocate, and manage financial resources that go towards financing research in Kenya. In this space, we do not act alone. My colleague, Professor Yawa, is the regulator, plays the regulator role. And we've got another entity called Kenya National Innovation Agency, for which now it deals with research to commercialization. So we are three entities. The first one is NACOSTI. NACOSTI is National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation, who my predecessor professor has just spoken to you. The next one is National Research Fund, abbreviated as NRF. You'll be seeing that often, which deals with funding research. And then we've got Kenya National Innovation Agency that deals with the research to commercialization. Maybe key highlights of the two talks, and which I'd like to probably tease out. The first one is there is inadequate funding geared towards NARS. And for obvious reasons, it's an issue to do with prioritization. This is historical in the sense that some years back, most of African nations were food secure. The population was very low, and we never foresaw a rise in or an increase in population that will demand food. And that's why food security has become an issue. Picking from my predecessors, I'm meant to understand the level of funding of NARS in Africa is 0.02%. against the NEPAD approved funding level, which stands at 2%. And you've seen from my previous speaker, within the Kenyan context, we are around 0.06%, which is almost equivalent to the South Africa. However, we are supposed to be at 2%. And that brings me to the topic of today discussion, which is strengthening of regional collaboration for resource mobilization. And I've been given a panel here who will talk around innovative approaches to agricultural research funding. And the first word there, innovative, is contextual. Because when you look at innovative, it means more than what it stands there, because we all know innovations, and we cannot get innovative about funding. It's either you get the funds from the government, or you either attract from our partner. So I'll probably try and see which are these innovative ways my panelists will bring on the table, so that we can be able to see through and ensure we get sustainability in funding agriculture. So the first on the panel is Dr. Apollinaire Jikeng, who's the DG ILRI. And probably what we might need a set of seats here, so that, and if you've got some few microphones to be used, I'll really appreciate. Dr. Apollinaire Jikeng, DG ILRI. ILRI is International Livestock Research Institute, which is based here in Kenya. I'll call again the second panelist, who is Dr. Yarama Ndripaya, Country Engagement Officer, East Africa Regional Coordinator, EAT. If you're in the house, please come up front. The third panelist is Mr. Macharia, who's the country director, Mr. John Macharia. He's online, thank you. And then the fourth panelist is Dr. Evans Ilatzia, Deputy Director, CALRO. So I'll give each of the panelists 5 minutes, one to introduce themselves, And two, to speak around the two discussions or the two talks, one which was by Professor Walter Yawa, and the other one by Dr. Felista Makini, to give their overview on what they think. I'll start at home because they say charity begins at home. I'll start with Dr. Evans Ilatia, who's the Deputy Director General, Livestock, CALRO. So you'll introduce yourself and give your views around this issue of funding. And then thereafter, I'll follow up with a question, and you've got 5 minutes.
Thanks, Professor Ndala. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Now, my name is Evans Ilasia, Deputy Director General in charge of livestock within the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization. I've been in this landscape of managing research at the various senior management levels for over 10 years. So it's a dynamic that I understand very well when it comes to attracting funds and innovative ways of trying to convince somebody else to support your research initiative. I'm a specialist in livestock systems, mainly breeding and genetics. So now going into the issue of funding in NARS. I know for some of you who have been in agriculture research for some time, you will agree with me that it is more difficult to get funding now than it was 30 years ago. That is a fact. Then number two, the issue of depending on benevolence to support agricultural research is no longer sustainable. So you have to come up with a system of how do I get sustainable funding to support key agricultural research programs for your NARS. Just to give a very recent example, and everybody knows what has happened in the last 1 year, one month or so, when the USAID was dismantled. Now you can view that picture and see what impact has it created, especially for some of the NARS that were depending on support from USAID. Support to CDC has also been withdrawn. So you can imagine some of the research organizations like medical research institutes in Africa, which were depending on that, what is going to happen. Of course, those kind of questions, when they come to your mind, then it means we must come up with a sustainable way of getting money to support our core research programs. Of course, most of the NARS, the genetic technologies, innovations, some of them are actually geared towards commercialization. So the thinking now should start from that particular element so that we see how do we get sustainable funding for our research program. And this is something which needs to start bothering anybody who is in research management. How do you get this money? How do you establish systems, for example, agriculture research fund within your organization to be able to serve as a model, a reserve to support some research programs, and also a way of attracting resources to support your research work. Because, of course, Professor Yawa has talked about money being there, but you can see even national governments supporting research is becoming, especially agricultural research, is becoming less and less with the time. Of course, they appreciate that agriculture is important. That is a fact. Then they also appreciate that it needs to be supported. But you see, somebody who is sitting at a high level decision making, maybe at Treasury, will say, if I don't support agriculture research, will it result into a crisis? The answer is no. So if the answer is no, can you imagine when they are prioritizing? They would rather prioritize something else, but not agriculture research. So, Prof, let me just stop there in the meantime as we continue with the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Director, Livestock CALRO. Next is Dr. Apollinaire Jikeng. Kindly give your perspectives.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Carlo colleagues for setting the stage and creating this conversation space. Let me go back to Dr. Lusike, who started. So it's a Kenyan, another Kenyan, but I think we have to learn what's happening in Kenya. I'm very proud to have spent a good chunk of my career here. I've seen a lot of evolution. And I'm also seeing a lot of innovation, not just in funding, but in many things here in Kenya. I wish we had other colleagues from other parts of Africa in here to hear the story of Kenya. But I think we can broaden our perspective, talk about generalize things a bit. And because I'm very keen in a South-South collaboration, we don't have to go elsewhere to learn new models. I think that's important. And Dr. Makindi, your presentation is very clear, including the presentation from Nakosti. So in my mind, I think the reflection from the first set of talks is what are the sources of funding to support the work that we do? It could be medical research, it could be agriculture, it could be anything else. I think there are three main sources. One is the government, and we have to appreciate and celebrate what the Kenyan government is doing. The NRF is an important agency. I'm also a recipient. 2018, I got a grant from a sister grant with NRF, from my university, working with Egerton University here. This was a grant with the UK Research Institution, jointly with NRF, called the Newton Fund. I think it actually helped us to do a lot of work. It's my plea here. The director is here. Please get the Newton Fund going, because it was a very good construct that supported many scientists. The second source of funding is philanthropy. People who are rich, people who are generous. I think we have to activate those channels in Africa, because we have many rich Africans who can actually choose one or two institutions and say, we're going to fund you. Good funding doesn't have to be millions. It has to be consistent funding and funding the right thing. I think that's the second area. And the third one is the private sector. How can we get industry to buy some of the things that we do in our universities and research institutions? Those are the three funding sources that we can broadly put in place. There are subcategories, trust funds, and things like that. We should ask ourselves a question. What's happening in those three sources of funding? Are we getting adequate funding from the three? It's a question back to the audience. We can have our own self-reflection and things like that. Above that, we also have external funding versus internal funding. We have donors, agencies, generous countries funding us and things like that. We have to ask the question, how can we stabilize when USAID is not there? Do we close and go back? And I think that also speaks to taking our own responsibility to drive our own agenda from our government. I think that's also an important dimension. I want to leave it here just to help us frame the conversation that we're going to have moving forward. If given another chance, I can bring this to the agricultural sector just to show you where we are. And I think the health sector and other sectors are having the same challenges. And the key thing is, how can we at least identify one or two things that's working in Kenya and try to do that in other countries? I talked about the Newton Fund, which is a collaboration between the UK government and the Kenyan government. Can things like that be set across African countries, Nigeria, South Africa, Cameroon, Burundi? And I think those are the innovations that we want to see, because we have the same problems. We're trying to deal with the same issues. If you get a group of scientists in the region to pull little pieces of resources to create significant funding, you can find a solution that will go across 2 or 3 countries. We're trying to duplicate, and even when we don't have the resources. I'll leave it here and pass on to my next intervenant. Yeah.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Yaraman Dripaya. I'm TAT Regional Coordinator for East Africa. Prior to this, I am the immediate past Director for Plant Resources Department of the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria. I've also been privileged to sit on table with donors on behalf of Sub-Saharan Africa as a member of the voting member of the CGIAR board for 2.5 years, from 2017 to 2019. Funding is critical, and I think everything we're doing in this meeting would be fruitless as long as there is no funding. And no one needs to be told this story, and that's why we're here to discuss funding. But has it always been this way in Africa? I beg to disagree. In the very previous years, some years before, when Africa was still a very young continent, so many of our people had good opportunity to fund activities in country, sometimes from even the rural agricultural setup. I recall my case, the case of my country, Nigeria. Nigeria was built on the foundation of agriculture, with the pyramids of granules in Kano and many others, the cocoa and the like. So why is funding today becoming a problem? Fundamentally, what my colleagues have said are true, but I think we need to re-strategize. I think that our governments need to rethink the basic way to fund agriculture. We've looked at agriculture for so many years as development programs, and it has never worked. It is time to make agriculture a business, and it has the opportunity to be sustainable if it is turned into business. We have so many huge population of young people out there on the streets. We claim there is no job, but the single job employer is actually agriculture, which I believe if we put our minds together, we can create the environment to bring about the jobs. So why is our agriculture suffering? It's suffering simply because research in particular has been neglected. I've worked in the Nigerian research system for decades, and I have seen how the up and down of research funding has been. Let me be precise. At a point, we have 17 research institutes in Nigeria, but the collective funding for the 17 research institutes for about 5 to 7 years from the Nigerian government was what Brazil could give Embrapa in 1 year. So we need real political tone, a win from government to fund agriculture. Again, there are opportunities of international funding my colleagues have talked about. Have we been able to collectively and coordinated-wise assess this? No. We've become more competitors among ourselves for very small grants rather than pulling ourselves together as synergy people, working together in partnerships at regional levels if necessary to put our priorities right and demand where the money should be. The good book, my Bible tells me in Ecclesiastes 10:19 that money answereth all things. Without money, my people, we can't go anywhere. Incidentally, we have the money, but we're not prioritizing the use of this money. We can go on and on, but let me stop here. We need funding, strategic and sustainable funding, if we must make the impact.
My panelists are doing good in terms of time. They are all below 3.5 minutes. I've given them 5 minutes, so we'll be having adequate time for Q&A. At the back of my mind, I know, and those who have been KALRO for long, KALRO's contribution to the global economy, I think needs to be reinvestigated, and we have to have at least a clarity, because I'm informed the beef farming in Brazil, the grasses used there came from KALRO here in Kenya. All the beef, the other example I can give is the breeding, cattle breeding across the region, be it east, south, and north. They must involve KALRO in Kenya. And it goes on in terms of capacity building. If I asked some of you to raise your hands, you are beneficiaries or you've been trained here at KALRO. That in itself, I think we need to rethink ways of giving back. And this is the session where I want to now ask one more question. I'm told the panelists online is not available for now. However, I will go to Dr. Evans Silatia, whom the question is, what has been the most significant funding challenges for NARS in Africa, and how does this affect the ability to transform regional food systems amidst climate crisis? I'll repeat. What has been the most significant funding challenges for the NARS in Africa, and how does this affect the ability to transform regional food systems amidst climate crisis? I'll give you 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Prof, for that opportunity. Of course, one of the most obvious challenge to support, funding support to the NARS in Africa here and most other regions is actually the element of prioritization when it comes to national development. Everybody acknowledges that agriculture is a key player, especially in Africa here, is the one actually driving most of these economies. But you will find that if you look at the commitment that is made towards especially research to drive new technology and innovation, you find it is too little. We already just mentioned here in the preliminary that according to NEPAD, we are supposed to be doing 2%, but now we are doing almost 100 times below 0.02. That is already tells you is actually the element of prioritization of this research for the national governments and all this. Even we have regional. I know, like in this East Africa region, we have a regional organization like ASAREC, which are supposed to coordinate and even foster this South-South collaboration within the region. But you see the element of funding actually comes in. That's why we also ask, for example, some of the development partners we have, African Development Bank and all these, how can they come in to support, for example, this strengthen this regional research centers like ASAREC to be able to coordinate research program, for example, in the Eastern region. We have FAR, I think, also which coordinates research, mostly in West Africa and all this. That kind of funding, the commitment, nations come together and make big commitments towards this kind of support. But when you retreat back, there are other more urgent things that come in to overtake this agricultural research. And of course, Professor Aparonaya talked about the philanthropy element of it. You know, philanthropy is something, is more of willing giver. So it actually depends on how you convince a willing giver to support your work. And this philanthropy comes also from organizations which have also their own priorities and they have to list them. So sometimes you find that the resources which are supposed to come in to support innovations in agricultural research, sometimes are ranked lower in the list, and therefore they attract the list in terms of support to agricultural research. And all this has an impact. Everybody appreciates that the climate change is becoming the biggest threat to food security in the whole world. That is also, I know, is a fact. But now, when it comes now, how do we get these innovations, technologies that are supposed to assist communities to circumvent the impact of climate change? See, there is also a problem there. Now, where do we get the support to have this innovation? Because technology generation innovation needs money, time and resources. So if there is no clear commitment to support this kind of initiatives, it becomes very difficult. Now, I want just to give you a very good living example here in Kenya, where we have some NARS that they were there before, they were brought back to Karo, and then they are going back, like coffee, tea, and coffee research. Those organizations actually thrived because there was a deliberate effort through a legislative process to entrench something which they call it the levy. So it is actually entrenched in the legislation. So there is no option that you are not going to give them money. It's actually by law. So if we have such, and I know this is for specific commodities that have a market, a very structured market system. But then when you look at the NARS and the other value chains which are embedded, there are so many value chains, over 30. Now, how do we impose a levy on over 30 commodities through a legislative process? That one has been a big challenge. So when we talk about this, those are some of the elements that we look at that are actually a hindrance for this NARS to get sustainable funding and therefore to be able to develop technologies and innovations that will be able to support farmers, circumvent the impact of climate change.
Yeah, my next panelist is DG ILRI, Dr. Paulina Jikeng. And your question goes, what role can innovative donor-driven initiatives such as matching grants and crowdfunding campaigns play in supporting NARS long-term research goals? What role can innovative donor-driven initiatives such as matching grants and crowdfunding campaigns play in supporting NARS long-term research goals? I know you mentioned about utafiti is one of the matching grants.
Thank you so much. Let me share a few thoughts just to tell us where we are in the current context. I want to then bring this to agriculture. And on this, I also want to mention that I will be using some examples beyond the International Livestock Research Institute that I lead. They could come from other CGIAR centers, because when I was invited, or the EMD of the system, the CGIAR system organization was invited, she asked me to step in for her. So it's really a much broader view than the ILRI one. I think in terms of, we've reached a point where we need to increase funding. Whatever target you set, whether you're looking at it from the national lens of the growth population, the growing population, or looking at, for us to meet the climate change challenge or other issues, looking at the sustainable development goals, all the parameters that we set looking at 2030, there is no way out. We have to increase funding. That's one thing. The second one is, if you look at the report, where we were, or the gains that we have made up to 2015 in food security, sustainability, empowering people in various places, for a range of reasons, we've lost that, or we are losing that. It's related to reduced funding, some of that related to COVID and the current funding crisis, and the need to accelerate. If you look at the issues that we need to solve and the amount of resources that are available to us, the funding is actually decreasing. Even for us within the CG, if we look at where we were 10 years ago, if you normalize it against inflation and things like that, today we are receiving much less money than what we received more than 10 years ago. And the issues are actually exacerbated. Before I get to the funding, we have to be innovative in the way that we work. We can no longer work in isolation and maximize on the resources that we have. It's therefore my call that, yes, we say we collaborate, we have partners, we have to do better than that. We have to collaborate with partners with whom we are reconstituting the whole, which is greater than the sum of the part. We are not just putting pieces together. We have to be in the design, the co-implementation, and then, try to deliver solutions. Even within a country, one institution should not try to do it alone. That's really, for me, the first thing that we need to put in place. We've been collaborating, but we have to be a bit more intentional. To the extent that one institution can prioritize and say, we are not going to do this, Dr. Ilatio mentioned, because a collaborating institution can do it and can do it better. Because sometimes we compete. You spend your resources doing some project where you can never move the needle. You could leave that, do something where you move the needle, and let your collaborating or partnering organization do it much better and bring, much more better results. If you look at where we are in terms of agricultural research and development funding, It's not just a problem for us in the global south, it's a global issue. But it is it is only that it is exacerbated in the global south because we have very limited resources on the table to begin with. I also want to address the issue of looking at how we are actually benefiting from innovations or commercializing innovations coming from the R&D sector. We do very little of that. For me, I think that would be the way to position our work in a way that the private sector, even some philanthropies, can be interested in the things that we do. I come from a country where when you go to university, you see more or less vested, well-trained people because we work on issues that are not aligned with our national priorities. We continue to have topics, research topics to MSc and PhD students who have nothing to do from the communities that we come from. And I think we have to be a bit more intentional. Even when we send our students to work or to do research outside of the continent, they should go with topics, with issues that will bring them back home because we need those solutions. I see a lot of mismatch there. My call on this point is that at the national level, we have to mobilize the resources, excellent human resources that we already have in our universities, in research institutions, to get them to focus on our national priorities. I think that's really important for me. For the funding, if you go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we keep talking about the same sources of funding, the same foundation, the same funding agencies. It's time for us to diversify. If we don't diversify, if we do not diversify, we'll continue to be vulnerable. Early January, when the USAID cut came through, one colleague of mine who leads an institution rang me up and said, "Oh, I'm very lucky." I say, "Why?" I say, 3 years ago, my organization was relying on USAID by about 50% of the funding. If this crisis was to happen 3 years ago, that institution would close. So we really have to diversify the source of funding, whether at the institute level, departmental level, and things like that to create a bit more resilience. We also have to look for sources of funding that are consistent. You can have them on a regular basis. I'm told that time is limited, but let me leave it here. If I have another opportunity to speak, I'll be able to elaborate a bit more and bring some other points here. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. I wish you pick out the questions that you'll wish to ask each of our panelists, because immediately after we are going to Q&A, and we will be having a call to action. So your views should also be included in the call to action. So allow me to invite the last panelist, Dr. Yarama. And Yarama will be answering the question to how can governments in the region strengthen their support for NARS through predictable and sustainable funding models. You've got 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, moderator. In my earlier submission, I made clear that money is very important, funding is very important. But not just the fund. How about the African scientists? Let me just digress a little. The African scientists today is at a dilemma. Dilemma in the sense that some of them have been privileged to study in very highly qualified centers with enormous infrastructure for research. Today, you can believe with me that across the globe, wherever you go, you find African scientists doing excellently well everywhere across the globe. Why is it not repeating here at home? The reality is, here at home, some challenges arise. And these include poor infrastructure, poor remunerations. I mean, you can really see that the African scientists, if you look at the participation in this meeting, it testifies how much of African scientists are at the global level playing science. But coming back home, we are limited because of lack of infrastructure and others. So our inputs have been limited. And therefore, on a daily basis, there is this struggle by the African scientists to get out of Africa to a place where he can have infrastructure to practice what he has learned. If therefore we must keep this group of scientists and move agricultural research forward in Africa, funding is critical. What are the steps we can take in funding? Like I did present earlier, there are several ways we can think of initiatives. Donor fatigue is already setting in Africa. We don't need to deceive ourselves. But there is local available resources that we can rechannel if there is the political will. So the first important thing is that we need leaders in Africa who will have the vision and the passion to be able to take step of decision to commit to funding agriculture, just like even as encouraged by the African Union. But that is lacking, and we must do whatever advocacies we need to bring on board such leaders. On Monday, we listened to very eloquent speeches from some of our top leaders. And I was very impressed with what His Excellency, President Goodluck Jonathan, presented when he became president. How he went to look for technocrats and put them in the position of things and say, drive this truck. Even though I'm the president, I will give you every support to be able to drive and deliver. No wonder people like Dr. Adeshina was the Minister of Agriculture. Ngozi Owenjuela was Minister of Finance. And Nigeria did reasonably well, very well during that season. So if we could keep this kind of people in leadership positions, I think thinking together we can do it. Practical steps of what we can do. One, why don't we think of, for example, at African Union level, begin to have initiatives that are actually Africa-oriented and convince the national presidents and leaders of governments to commit to this so that we can establish things like multinational funding strategy for research. It doesn't have to be that competitive. It can actually, I remember through FARA, we had some fundings in the years past that require 2-3 countries must apply before they can get it allocated. Those kind of funding strategies bring us together for synergy rather than placing us to compete against one another. So I think governments at very high level like the African Union should begin to think of initiatives for multilateral funding for African agricultural research. We know government can never do this alone. Private sector will not be able to succeed alone. So we require partnerships between governments and real private sectors in Africa to come together to be able to fund this kind of mechanisms. But government owns the responsibility to ensure that there's credible environment for the private sector to actually trust government to enter into partnerships. I recall in Nigeria, there was one time we operated a strategy that was useful, the rice levy. We eat tons of rice and import tons of rice everywhere in Nigeria. And the government sat down and said, look, can't we do research on rice? Where is the money going to come from? Let us put levy on this huge importation we make so that at least 10% of the levy can go to research. And we experimented that. And I promise you within that period, we were able to make significant impact on rice research in Nigeria. And today you can see the Narikas that came out of Nigeria and others working with Africa Rice. Now, another thing is sometimes we decide for the people. I think it's time for research to also understand that even if we have all the money, we do not own all the intellect to take what makes tomorrow right for Africa. We need to engage all stakeholders in planning and ownership of where do we go research. There are many private sectors I have met across Africa who are willing to fund research, but they want to fund specific research of interest to them. This we must accommodate and be able to work with private sectors to convince them of areas to put their money for partnership research. government political will can never be overemphasized. And I see several areas in Africa where good initiatives exist that we can emulate. Kenya has just given us some examples. But I also know if you go to Cote d'Ivoire, on the cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire, there has been very nice initiative by the government of Cote d'Ivoire supporting research to a level that yes, please, you discover that so many progress were being made and exports of cocoa were being made from Cote d'Ivoire. So I will stop over here, but there are several initiatives that are already in existence that we can lean on. And I think I want to request that we look inward, come together, synergize together, and why don't we get a committee of think tank at a very high level to think on how to move the agenda of research funding in this country? I stop here. Thank you.
Another round of applause to our panelists. I want to open up for 10 questions. I'll do first round of 5, the next round of 5. And I hope we've got rapporteurs who will also be picking up. So you'll say your name and your country, and then thereafter you ask your question and direct to a specific. If it's general, put it as general. So I'll start from this side going around. So I'll ask, you have can use the one in front. The gentleman, then the lady, then these 3 gentlemen. Thank you.
Habari yenu, jina langu Francois Stepman. Nilijifunza kazi katika Rome and Brussels.
You may have to translate some of our friends.
Idinade, Berainha. Erokamano. This is one of the most important sessions of the whole conference. There are 2 other sessions following up on this one, on the same ID, NARS. Tomorrow, 10:30, conference room number 1 will be the launch with a 4 million budget of the European Commission of the Global NARS Consortium, GNC. I will explain briefly what it is about, but there's another session on Friday, which is called CAPTCHA, which is the capacity building accelerator. Now, I worked for FARA since 2007, the Forum of Agricultural Research in Africa. I have seen many colors. I have seen many wrongdoings. I have seen donors distracting a lot of African researchers into constantly putting their time in writing proposals, justifying for the money they received, and not being able to do any more their research. I think we are today in a very crucial moment where we have to rethink the whole funding, because we know, and it is not new, that for the last 20 years, the whole system of funding agricultural research, and not only in Africa, is getting stuck because it has created a clientelism and it has created a micromanagement. Now, I work for the Global Forum of Agricultural and Innovation Research based in Rome. 2 years ago, we did an assessment and a survey with all the continental fora, the Forum of Agricultural Research in Africa, the Asian Forum, the Latin American Forum, etc. And the conclusion was, we have to rethink funding, and it has to go to NARS, because the National Agricultural Research institutions, organizations, are the closest to the national development setting. The problem with the landscape of funding, it is incredibly fragmented. I'm managing a platform which is called the Platform of African-European Partnerships on Agricultural Research for Development. It has 12,000 participants, members, all over Africa, and also many donors. And I can assure you, it is mind-boggling, because there are so many actors, so many players, that you just lose track. And then I'm seeing researchers chasing for money. So coming now to solutions. We are working at the Global Forum with a software developer who has developed a software which has a database of 2,000 funders, public funders, whereby you would upload your research proposal, concept notes, and it would give you automatically a number of funding opportunities with the deadlines. Now, we have to be very careful with such software because we have an issue of propriety. I remember, and I will not name which US donor it was, where they would collect through a global call for proposals a lot of IDs, use the ID, but give it to one of their favorite partners. We don't want this to be repeated. So the issue of propriety and making sure that IDs are not being lost in a database has to be reassured. And the second one is, again, the last 20 years, when I'm watching the African landscape especially, I have seen so many training sessions after capacity building, whatever. And I think we are talking from the ones offering those trainings, training of individuals, not of institutions. And this is regrettable because at the end of the day, you would want not to have institutions to be incapacitated, but institutions. We talk a lot about regenerative agriculture. Let's talk about regenerative institutions, having ownership and having the capacity of having South-South collaboration with Asia, with Latin America, without having to pass through a European donor. Thank you for
very informative of a contribution. Thanks.
My name is Nancy Owino. I'm the founder for Nature Target Initiative, a youth-led organization here in Kenya. Our main focus is on economic empowerment and youth entrepreneurship through agripreneur. So I love what our second panelist said on the impacting of the research. When you talk about funding, is this research that we're doing really also impacting? Because 20 years to now, we cannot be having the same discussion. I'm still a youth. And growing up, I remember back at home, I come from Busia, we were doing really good in agriculture. Agriculture was the backbone for this country. But now when we must face the reality, we are doing extremely bad. Our country, in terms of agriculture, is really doing bad. The nation that was known to feed itself, it's currently depending on the importation. What has happened? That is the question. So my question will come in are we involving youths? Are we involving youth-led organization in this space for research and funding? We are young minds. Trust me, we can think so well, but at the same time, we youths, we don't like our hands dirty. So when we go back home, we are trying to come up with a solution, researching, funding, but the youths that we are trying to create a future for them, they're not willing to make their hands dirty. Are we solving the situation? So. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There was this three. I'll do another round. Then we go to Madam there. Then last these two. Okay, please proceed.
My name is Mulugeta Mokre from Ethiopia. In my previous life, I've been many years, close to 30 years, in the NARS and international centers, particularly in Summit, and led a big initiative with my Kenyan colleagues, Felister McKinney and others on sustainable intensification and so on. I have this good experience, but I left the system with some sad notes. I've been attending regional meetings as early as 2000 something in Pretoria to put the card up, then in Maputo, in Gabon, to raise the contributions of African countries, national governments, percentage of the GDPs to agriculture and subsequently to agri-research. That has not happened. Few countries have surpassed 10%, although the target is 14%. So charity begins at home. I mean, the previous speaker, Professor Apollinaire, and my friend have taken the thoughts and have said a lot about what was supposed to be done. It hasn't been done. One of the experience we have in Africa is, except Kenya, in South Africa, commercial agriculture has not been developed. The private sector is not commercial agriculture. Very limited countries have that one. So you cannot depend on funding from private sector. South Africa has had many years of private sector funding through what they call commodity boards. The good wine we drink is funded, the research is funded by the wine board, maize board, wheat board, and all this. We have commercial farming coming up in Africa. Can we put some levies, as mentioned earlier, to the specific commodity research, dairy board, all that? And we can't tap the experience of these countries to finance this one. But unfortunately, we have the NARS that are underfunded. They cannot innovate. They cannot attract the best minds. But governments have to take action.
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Thank you so much. My name is Boniface Monene from Tukuza Africa Foundation in Kenya, Meru, Kenya specifically. One of the big issues that we have at Tukuza Africa, we work with high school students. Our main goal is to increase interest towards STEM education and also innovation. During the Kenya Science and Engineering Fair, formerly Kenya Science Congress, we have had high school students presenting innovations which are quite great. But once they're through with the Kenya Science and Engineering Fair, that's the end of it. And as Tukuza Africa, we came up with an, this year actually, we partnered with the Agricultural Society of Kenya, ASK, through the Meru National Show, so that we can give these students an opportunity to exhibit now these innovations that they have in real world and into the real people who need the same innovations to solve different problems in the society. But here's the problem. I have attended so many innovation and also STEM programs here in Nairobi, but when you go now to away from Nairobi, you get away from STEM education and innovation itself. In Meru, we've not gotten any support, especially on STEM education when you look at the teacher support and also student support. And we have a big problem again. Why? Because we are competing for these funds with big organizations. And today, innovations are not taken as innovations. Every organization or funders are looking at what are we gaining from this one? And the small or grassroots organizations are getting it rough to get funding, especially on high school students support. And during this agricultural show on May 24th, we'll be having an innovators bootcamp. We've been looking for support, and we're trying to look at how can NARS support high school-led innovations, because most of them are supporting university students, whereas we need to really support high school, junior secondary who are having different innovations so that they can become the future innovators. And actually even today, because—
Thank you. That goes to Carl, I think.
Thank you.
I'm Bahati Innocent, the Chief Executive Officer of EcoStarch, and we've developed a biotechnology platform that turns cellulose in crops, crop waste, in fact, into edible starch. These are things like maize stalks, wheat husks, banana stems, and we turn the cellulose in them into edible starch. And this can increase food production by 50%. But as a small startup, we are often overlooked. And we're overlooked in favor of the large organizations because they think that these are just young people, there's nothing they can bring into the table. So,
I think that has been alluded to.
the question is this. So how can an innovation like this scale and become dominant and become relevant in a space where big organizations dominate, ensuring that this innovation grows internationally with its roots in Kenya? Because I've seen some organizations out there trying to buy this idea, because I was interviewed by AP News and Voice of America, and these are countries which have higher funding.
Ask your question.
Exactly.
I am finding myself biased, so if you are Kenyan, not asking any question, please. So next.
Asante, natoka Tanzania kwa majina. I'm sure my Kenyan friends understood that very well. My name is Koleta Ndunguru. I'm the CEO of World Vegetable Center. It's a research and development entity that focuses on vegetable research. We work very closely with our Tanzania agriculture research institutions. But my coming to this session was predominantly to listen more to how the funding arena works. I'm a former private sector banker, as well as a development banker, and now I'm moving into research and development. And I am absolutely baffled at how little funding is rooted to this session. I'll give you a prime example. Just the other day, we heard a philanthropist talk about having $28 million, but only giving a research entity $3.3 million of that money. I was personally disturbed by that, but I'm learning a little bit more around the barriers. So my possible solutions are, have national agriculture research institutions considered raising a bond? Yes, a bond. We have infrastructure bonds in our countries. Why don't you have a national research bond that is backed by the government through some sovereign arrangement, or even the international bodies, if they're willing to back these types of bonds up, or even the African Development Bank? Have we spoken to the central banks? Within the region, I know there are central banks that are doing a lot towards de-risking agriculture lending. I even heard His Excellency Obasanjo talk about a central bank initiative that they have in Nigeria around de-risking the agriculture portfolio. Where are the national agriculture research institutions in these discussions? This is a private sector, it's a public entity looking at de-risking agriculture. We as researchers can provide input to that de-risking arrangement and also get funding in the process. Another thing, which is more at home, within our national agriculture research institutions, do we have a funding unit, like a resource mobilization unit? Not a finance department, a resource mobilization unit. These are just some ideas that I've been thinking about. They probably do exist, but it does speak to what the gentleman talked about, bringing, like thinking of agriculture as a business. Of course, agriculture has got that interesting dichotomy of being a public good, but it's also a business. So how can we interplay around this area? Thank you.
From Kenya? Kenya, no. Yourself? Any other? Okay, proceed.
I think I can be heard. So my name is Lawrence Gishane. I'm ESG trainer, sustainability. I've got a background in banking and finance. I match up most people towards finance as well as training. Now, my question goes to the second participant who talked about making agriculture a business. I've had a chance of working with the youth in different countries, and just as I can allude with one of us who talked about agriculture not being something that is very lucrative to the youth in terms of it looking dirty. And it's always because they look at it from an area that is not something they want to embrace, as opposed to having look for jobs.
Your question, please.
So my question is to the government, what will you do to incentivize this agriculture so that it can be more embraced by the youth at all levels, especially bringing it up as a good curriculum that integrates issues that are taught in schools, universities, so that it does that becomes something wasted when they're out there?
Thank you. I want to close, if it's burning, in 1 minute, please.
Okay. This one. My name is Shadrach Odikara from Cultural Kakamega, and my question is, or rather my comments and a compliment from the first person who asked a question. And I wonder what the panelists and the audience have to say about the decentralized science as we discuss about funding scientific research and in relation to the blockchain technologies and funding scientific research. So this is a question that and food for thought for both the panelists and the entire audience. So
Thank you.
thank you.
So I have a few questions from the online. So the first question is from Jacob Wanyama. I think it has already been asked, is about youth. The next one is Miriam Kinywa, also around the area of direct purpose funding, that has already been asked. Elkana Nyambati, the question around collaboration among scientists is critical. Probably we need to think around collaboration. What are the major causes that can hinder collaboration or can enhance collaboration? There is a question to Dr. Paulinea from Samuel Mbuku. Give practical examples and compelling actions that can strengthen partnership between CGIAR and NARS in Africa to rescue the basket that is sinking. We've got Maina Mwanki. Can our NARS have niches that focus rather than being generalists? That's another question from Maina Mwanki. And then final question from Harun Odhiambo is, how strong are our internal audit systems in terms of managing research funds in Africa? So I have 10 minutes. I'm supposed to end at 16 minutes past 4 p.m. So I'll give each of our panelists their 5 minutes. Please stick to that timeline so that we end on time.
So thanks a lot. I wouldn't even use the 3 minutes because I think, or 5 minutes, we've received quite a bit of comments. It would be fruitless to attempt to do that. Let me just address the last question to me about specific examples between the CG and NARS. There are many. I can start one with livestock. You know, in Kenya, the pastoralists are always faced with serious challenges. So more than about 10 years ago, we developed the index-based livestock insurance, essentially creating an insurance policy to support farmers who could lose their animals and they can restock. So that's just one example that has been extremely successful here in Kenya. I think adopted to be also used in Ethiopia and other countries. So I will leave it here so that my colleagues can have the opportunity to address the questions.
Thank you very much. I will attempt to address some few questions and give just one last call to action. There was a request, there was an issue of how can NARS support high school innovators? How do we bring the young to embrace agriculture? And my colleague, Dr. Malomo, can you raise your hand? He's from Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria. And we've had an attempt of catching the youth young into agriculture. What did we do? We created an innovation we call adopted schools model. So what we do is every research institute of the 17 research institutes we have in Nigeria, we say within your 20 kilometer radius, find 2-3 schools, adopt them, discuss agriculture with them, create an innovation center in the school, display agricultural technologies there for the school to learn, and then do school gardening with them to practically demonstrate how these crops can be grown, how this chicken can be raised, and others. And he's a living witness. There were immense participation in this, and the youths were taking this home, implementing it in their homes. So I think that's one thing we could do that can be of great help. Have NARS considered raising research bonds? I think that's a comment I feel worth looking into, and I recommend to the organizers. Making agri as a business, how do we incentivize agri to become, let me use the word people don't want, is sexy to the youth? The reality is that if you are expecting the youth to carry the whole our fathers carried to move agriculture forward, we will never make it. If you listen to the panel on Monday by His Excellencies, there were clear examples from different countries. One I recall vivid still is Nigeria, where an initiative was created by the government intentionally to bring youth into agro-entrepreneurship in agriculture, supported by government incentives, and this is happening. Last 3 weeks, I was in Kano, state of Nigeria. I visited to look at the wheat revolution going on in Nigeria. What is the story? What is going on? And I have met in several communities, almost 60% youth of the populations I met, who are declaring how much profit they are making by imbibing the wheat revolution, because government supports them with irrigation water. Some flour mills come with water pumps and others. So if we make the environment attractive to these youths, we will make it. Finally, my call to action is this. We might need to rethink funding for agriculture in Africa. We have had a long marriage between the NARS and the CG. I have worked in the NARS for quite a number of my life, and I've spent 16 years of my life in the CG. I think that in our partnership, we started very well before. I recall as a young man when we were going to IIT getting all kinds of capacity developments. They are no more happening. Let's go back. Let's rethink. Work together in synergy to become actually our own partners in real sense. They are remaining competitors for funding in the regions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll just narrow down to a question that was raised by our sister Coretta from Tanzania. Now, you talked about setting up internal resource mobilization units. I think basically that is what NARS organization should be starting to think about. And if they have started, then that is the way to strengthen, so that we have, for example, what you call Agriculture Research Fund, that now will look at basically internal resource mobilization, then any other source of funding, for example, from philanthropy, comes in to supplement what is already there. Of course, setting up such kind of a research fund, it actually also needs a bit of resources, so that any NARS within any given country in Africa here, they are able to set up this fund and put up a functional secretariat with the expertise needed for them to generate resources both internally and also source from external sources to come in and supplement. But majority of that funding should be skewed towards internal resource mobilization, up to and including even lobbying for the national government, so that they can be able to get some money into this particular fund. To me, that is a more sustainable way of getting funding that will not disrupt our long-term research programs. And of course, setting up an ARF within the NARS is not something that will take 1 year, not 2 years, not 5, not 10. It takes a long time. Yale University has a research fund that has been in existence for 98 years and is one of the biggest internal research funds in the world.
I want to again thank our panelists, so I can allow them to have their seats. We've got the last 20 minutes or so. However, before I hand over to the next speaker, I've got 2 minutes. Key aspect that I've picked out, which I think needs immediate attention, is one, land fragmentation among most African countries, because when you're fragmenting land, it doesn't allow for mechanization, and that one doesn't allow youth to come in and explore in terms of farming. Resource mobilization units, that's also critical. Introduction of levies. Of course, when you introduce levies, there is regional economic blocks. Of course, we need to be competitive. There is issue to do with bonds, de-risking, AI and blockchain technologies, collaboration, and philanthropists. So as I usher in the next speaker, who's going now to bring us to call to action and close this very scintillating session, allow me once again to thank you for having been attentive. For those whom were not able to ask questions, I'll ask the planners next time have a Mentimeter or where we can be able to place all those questions so that we can be able to address them in the near future. With those, allow me to invite Dr. Felista McKinney, or the moderator here, to try and bring it to a close here. Thank you.
A round of applause for Professor Ndala. Thank you so much for moderating that session, quite a heavy one, and a lot of information has moved, and we are grateful. Thank you so much, Professor Ndala, and the panelists for leading us through that session. Now, we are on time, but we wish that we do the best and also finish on time. The final session is the call to action and also the closing. I'm doing this on behalf of my boss, Dr. Felista McKinney. We will do this by welcoming our colleagues, Dr. Makelo and Dr. Kamau, to give us a call to action and summary of the recommendations that have arisen from the earlier two sessions. Then thereafter, Dr. McKinney will bring us to a close by giving the closing remarks on behalf of the Director General, who was hurriedly called for another mission. Welcome, Dr. Kamau.
Thank you, moderator. I want to start by saying that my name is David Kamau. I'm Director Environment and Natural Resources at CALRO. And I want to just do two things, and my colleague will continue from there. That is call for action and summary of recommendations. I know we've really had a lot in the last 2 hours, and I want to summarize the recommendations. One, we have heard that we have inadequate funding for the NARS institutions, and we've also heard that benevolent funding is I'm told to go very fast. Benevolent funding is not sustainable. So we have to ensure that financial sustainability, spearheaded by governments and partners, takes front stage. We also need to increase revenue streams and make agriculture a business. We have also heard about fragmented funding. We need to consolidate our research monies through multi-stakeholder approach rather than working in silos. And this is whether we are considering internal or external funding. We also need to create endowment funds. We need to actively participate in competitive grants. We need to undertake commercialization. We also need to consider digital funding options. We need to strengthen bargaining power with donors and strengthen collaboration and harmonize policies to attract more funding. We need to encourage philanthropy. We need to think about our training models. And for the call of action, the meeting calls upon governments at all levels to increase budgetary allocations or commitments for agricultural research. One way is also to introduce ad valorem levies for commodity value chains through stakeholder participative acceptable policies. We need agricultural stakeholders to commit to positive collaborations from a point of partner strength. We need to diversify sources of funding and consider consistent or sustainable funding. And we need to address the challenges facing agricultural research outputs in African countries. That includes poor infrastructure, poor remuneration, and all that. We also need to consider multilateral agricultural research funding initiatives at continental and regional levels, and they must not be competitive. Then the last one I'm having here is that governments need to make proper follow-ups on innovations by students in schools, agricultural colleges, and universities. Thank you. My colleague can probably add just a few, just one item or something. Yes.
So thank you very much. I'm Dr. Margaret Makelo. I'm the director in charge of partnerships and business development. We have put down all the issues that we need to do, but that means we will go out of this room without having a way forward on what we are going to do. I expect that as we are here today, the NARS, the private sector and government institutions, we should form a committee or a team that will now sit together and see how we are going to start actualizing the things that we are talking about. Otherwise, it will just be stories as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Makelo and Dr. Kamau. Now, straight away, I'm welcoming Dr. Felista Makini, the Deputy Director General Crops at CALRU, to represent our overall boss. Thank you. Karibu sana, madam.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Makelo. What we will need to do, because there's a team, a group waiting outside, and they're saying we are taking their time, we'll just have to close. But we have the people here communicating. We'll put down those notes, and definitely, like me, I have a list of things which I know we need to do. So we'll look at that. Let me just close by saying, as we come to the conclusion of this very highly engaging and enlightening session, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who has contributed to today's discussions. It has been an honor for CALRO to host this important dialogue under the theme, Sustainable Funding for NARS Towards Transformative Agricultural Research, a Pathway to Resilient Food Systems in a Climate Crisis. The insights shared today have reaffirmed the critical role that NARS play in shaping the future of agriculture in Africa, especially at a time when the twin challenges of climate change and food insecurity loom large. We have explored the complexity of funding landscapes and the pressing need to shift towards innovative, resilient, and long-term financing models. The emphasis on regional collaboration has illuminated pathways for greater impact, efficiency, and resource optimization. Particularly inspired by the rich perspectives brought forward by stakeholders from government representatives, international donors, private sector players, researchers, and development partners. Your diverse viewpoints underscore the fact that the journey towards sustainable funding for agricultural research is a shared responsibility requiring collective action and unwavering commitment. Moving forward, let us carry towards recommendation as a clarion call to all the actors, and let us foster deeper partnerships. What I want to just conclude is to say that we'll have a follow-up forum for this, what we have come up with. We'll have a follow-up forum And those will be available, will be, if we'll be able to invite even others to join in that follow-up, because there is a lot. And some of what we have learned, we don't want to end here, indeed, because the very purpose of this is really to look for funding and to look for sustainable funding and ways of funding and mechanisms and strategies. And so it won't end here. We'll have a follow-on follow-up forum in the near future. I won't say which date, but I know that that was also the purpose which we have been discussing, that we must do something to ensure that we are going to implement. So with that, God bless you so much. Thank you for joining. Unfortunately, we must allow the next team to come in so that they can prepare for their session. And apologies for late, but we are not late. Our session was to end at 4:30. So we are ending early for your sake. God bless you. God bless you all.